Section 6.3 is all about parabolas. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at everything that there is possible to know about parabolas and make them super simple. Define and get a new definition for a parabola, and then we're going to be able to find a vertex, a focus, and a directrix of a parabola. And then using all of that information, we're going to graph and translate parabolas. And then we're going to give domain and ranges of a relation that involves a parabola. And then we're going to find equations given certain information. Let's go ahead and just redefine what a parabola is. Because a parabola just used to be the curve of a quadratic function, and that's no longer going to be the case when we're talking about conic sections. Now we're going to say that a parabola is a locus of points, which just means collection, and a fixed plane that are equidistant from a fixed point, which we're going to call the focus, and the fixed line, called the directrix. So, a good example of a parabola is the graph of y equals 1/4 x squared. Our vertex here is 0, 0. So the vertex, if you're looking at the vertex and the point xy on the graph, it's a collection of points that are equidistant from the vertex, or from the focus, and the directrix. So we have that distance there, and then we have that distance there. And that distance has to be equal. So the eccentricity of a parabola is always 1. The reason that it's always 1 is because E is equal to C over A. And remember, we just said in that previous slide that C and A have to be equal. And if C and A are equal, then anything over itself is equal to 1, which is why the eccentricity of a parabola is always 1. Alright, so in order to graph a parabola, you need 5 things. You need the direction of opening, which can be determined if it's a positive or negative A value. You also need the vertex. You need this P distance, which is the distance from the vertex to your focus point and your directrix. Then you also need to know what your focus point is, and then you also need to know what your directrix line is. Okay, so if you're graphing a parabola that goes up or down, this is the ones that you're familiar with whenever we studied quadratic functions. You have the work form y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And remember, if a was positive, it opened up. If it was negative, it opened down. You have a center of hk. Now, remember that p that I told you about? I said that was the distance from your vertex to your focus point and your directrix. So since your focus point is above your vertex, in order to find your focus point, you just need to take your center and go up whatever the p amount is. So because you're moving up, that's affecting your y, so that's going to affect your k value. So your focus is whatever your center was, but you're just going to add p to your k value. Now, your directrix is a horizontal line, and it's going to be a horizontal line, but it's going to be below your focus. So it's going to be whatever that k value is, but down the p distance. So your directrix is going to be equal to whatever your k value is minus p. Now, we also have parabolas that are not functions, they're just relations, and the reason they're relations is because they're going to open up left and right. And instead of being y equals, they're going to be x equals. So we're going to have x equals a times y minus k squared plus h. So very similar to the one that opens up and down. This one's just going left and right. So your center is still going to be found at h, k, but because your parabola is opening left or right, your focus is to the right of your center, which means you need to take your h value and add p, and your directrix is going to be a vertical line instead of a horizontal line. So it's going to be x equals h, except for you're going to subtract p because it's going to be to the left of your parabola. Right. So let's talk about this mysterious p number that I talked about. So the p is the distance from the focus to the vertex and from the vertex to the directrix. And it's calculated by this. You want to take 1/4 of the a value. And you want to actually take 1/4 of the distance of the a value. So you want to do 1/4 of the absolute value of a. Okay, so let's try to do that. Let's find distance p and the vertex of a parabola that's y equals 2 parentheses x minus 3 squared plus 6. So, to find p, we need to do 1/4 of the absolute value of a. Well, the a value is 2, so we're going to do 1/4 of the absolute value of 2. So, absolute value of 2 is 2. So we have 1/4 of 2, or 1/4, and the 2 is actually in the denominator, right? So it's 1/4 times 2, and 4 times 2 is 8, so now we have 1/8. And our vertex is our h and our k value, so it's going to be 3, 6. So now we have our p, and we have our vertex. All right, next example. Let's write the equation of a parabola, and all we have is the vertex and the p value. So remember, our p value can tell us what the a value is. The formula to get the a value is just doing 1/4 times p. And if our p value is 1/4, then that means the absolute value of a is equal to 1/4 times 1/4. Well, 4 times 1/4 is just 1. And so now we know that the absolute value of a equals 1. Well, there are two numbers that I could take the absolute value of and get 1. It's either 1 or -1, which means that we're actually going to end up with two equations since we don't know really what the real value of a is. It could be either 1 or -1. So our first equation would be, it's going to be, or you can just write plus or minus, right? So plus or minus x minus 2, because 2 is our h value, squared. And then plus -1, which is the same as saying -1. All right, next type of problem. Let's write the equation of the parabola that has a focus of 5, -6 and a directrix of y equals 2. So the focus is going to be somewhere down here. And then you have a directrix that is over here. So remember, your vertex is in the middle of your directrix and your focus. So we just need to find what's in between them. All right, so there's our focus, there's our directrix. So again, we just need the midpoint. So we need that right there. So that right there is going to be, it's going to be the same x value, because again, it's just the midpoint, so it's 5. So in between 2 and -6 is going to be -2. So we have the vertex at 5, -2. So now we know the vertex. So now all we need to know is our a value, right? So we know what our p value is. Our p value is 4. Which means that if our p value is 4, then we can calculate our a value. Because if p is 4, and p is supposed to be 1/4 times the absolute value of a, that means that a is equal to plus or minus 1/16. So I'm solving for a, right? What I had to do here is I had to multiply both sides by the absolute value a, and then divide both sides by 4. So I had 1/4 divided by 4, which is the same as saying 1/4 times 1/4, which gives me 1/16. And because it's the absolute value, I get plus or minus. So my A value is plus or minus 16, which means my is going to be negative 1 over 16 x minus 5 squared minus 2. Okay, so a couple of things. First thing, how do I know it's the negative and not the positive? Well, remember that your focus is always supposed to be on the side where the parabola is going, right? So because my focus is here, that means my parabola is opening downwards. And if my parabola is opening downwards, then that means my A value is negative, okay? Also, one more thing. Let's look at if the focus is 5, negative 6, why is my K value minus 2, right? Well, remember, your focus is this point here, right? Your vertex, your HK, is here. And this value was 5, negative 2. So that's why this is a minus 2. Example. This one we're going to have the relation x equals 3 times y minus 2 squared plus k. We want to find x when y equals 0 and when y equals 4. Okay, so find x when y equals 0. We're going to plug in 0. So 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 plus 1 is 13. Alright, so now we're going to do y equals 4. So x equals 3 times 4 minus 2 squared plus 1. 4 minus 2 is 2, and then 2 squared is 4. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. Oh, okay, so we're getting the same answer from two different y values, which means that this is not a function, it is only a relation, because we have 2 points that are on it. Since both those points lie on the parabola, it's not a function. So let's say we want to graph this inequality. It's x is greater or equal to 1/2 y minus 3 squared plus 2. So the first thing we want to do is plot our vertex at 3, 2. We know that this is a relation, okay, because it's the x. So it's going to go either left or right. Because our A value is positive, it's going to go to the right, okay? So we're going to the right. And then because it is greater than or equal to, it's going to be shaded to the right as well. All right, last thing we want to do, let's graph the parabola 2x squared plus 4x minus y minus 1 equals 0. And then we're going to find the focus, the directrix, and then place them on the graph. All right, so in order to graph this, we first have to put it into work form. So I want to solve for y, and then once I have y solved for, I want to get into work form, so I need to complete the square. So the first thing to complete the square is I isolate my x values, and then I factor out the a values. My a value is 2, so when I factor out the 2, I'm left with x squared plus 2x. Okay, then I complete the square by taking half of that, and so half of 2 is 1, and then 1 squared is 1. So I want to add 1, but if I add 1, I have to make sure that I make up for it and subtract 1. But I'm not just adding 1, I'm adding 2 times 1. So instead of subtracting 1, I'm going to subtract 2. So this is the minus 1 that was already there, and then this minus 2 came from making up this 2 times 1. So now that I have completed the square, I can rewrite it as a perfect square. X squared plus 2x plus 1 becomes x plus 1 squared. And then that minus 1 minus 2 becomes negative 3. So now that I have my vertex, I can also calculate my p-value to figure out where my focus and my directrix is going to be. So remember, p is equal to 1 over 4 times the absolute value of a. So my a value is 2. So the absolute value of 2 is 2, and then 4 times 2 is 8. So my p-value is 8. So remember, I take that p-value and I add it, right? So I'm going to add it to my k-value to figure out what my focus is, and then I'm going to subtract it to figure out what my directrix is, okay? So my parabola is going to open up, right? And I know that my focus, after I go for my vertex and I want to add 1/8. After I do that, I get -2 and 7/8, which is right there. And then my directrix, so I'm going to take the -3, and then I'm going to subtract 1/8, so I get -3 1/8. So there's my directrix. All right, that's all there is to it. Go ahead and try some problems.